Hi and welcome everyone. This is Sabrina from Hong Leong Bank and I'll be your host for this session. Welcome to Hong Leong Bank's Sustainability Roundtable. Today's roundtable will be on the topic of efficient metals, seizing opportunities in sustainability and developing ESG readiness. Some housekeeping rules. If you have any questions for the panelists, kindly use our dedicated Slido, which you can access by scanning the QR code, which will be at the top left of the screen after this. Alternatively, you can also access the Slido feature by clicking on the URL available in the YouTube description below. While we'll be addressing most of the questions during the Q&A session, we may address some of them during the panel discussion when appropriate. Now let's meet our panelists and moderator for today's session. First off with us today, we have Shahrul Halim bin Soho, the Deputy Director of Machinery and Metal Technology Division at the Malaysian Investment Development Authority, or better known as MIDA. The division mainly focuses on machinery and equipment, engineering support industry, basic metal products, and fabricated metal products. Their functions include evaluating applications for manufacturing licenses, tax incentives, and matching grants. Besides that, they organize dialogues with industry associations to identify roadblocks and direction of the industry towards the development of a comprehensive ecosystem in Malaysia. And next, we have Datuk Sri Tai Hian Leng, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer at Mars Steel Berhad. He's trained as a mechanical engineer and has a master's degree in finance. Datuk Sri Tai has been involved in the formulation and implementation of Mars Steel Berhad as well as a number of companies' corporate strategies, including corporate planning, business expansion, and operations for over 30 years, apart from being involved in the steel sector. Datuk Sri Tai has also been extensively involved in the field of biotechnology, namely the production of radiopharmaceuticals and medical devices. Datuk Sri Tai is a government-appointed member to the board of Malaysia Steel Institute, which is an agency under the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI, and he's the Vice President and founding member of the Malaysian Steel Associations. Besides that, we have Datuk Lim Hong Tai, Group Managing Director of Anju Resources Berhad. Datuk Lim Hong Tai joined Anju Resources Berhad in August 2000 and was then appointed as Group Managing Director of Anju on 30th June 2008. In May 2018, Datuk Lim was elected as the President of Malaysia Iron and Steel Industry Federation for a term of 3 years and continues to hold the same position from 2021 to 2024. He serves as a director from Malaysia at the Southeast Asia Iron and Steel Institute and Vice President of the Asian Iron and Steel Council. He also serves as the board of Malaysia Steel Institute, a government agency under the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, overseeing the development of steel industry in Malaysia as well as in several private limited companies. And next with us today is In Xiao Long, Senior Research Associate at Khazanah Research Institute. He focuses on industrial policies, climate change, and future technologies. Furthermore, he spent a decade working in federal and state governments such as the Selangor State Government, the Economic Planning Unit, and MITI. He then spent another decade in civil society and academia. Xiao Long holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry and a Master's in Science in Environmental Technology from Imperial College London. Besides that, speaking as well as Hong Leong Bank's very own Ivan Liu, Head of Commercial Banking and Hong Leong Bank's Business and Corporate Banking section. Before joining Hong Leong Bank, Ivan has held several leadership positions in major international banks. And finally, we have our moderator for today's panel discussion, Dr. Juwita Mohamad, Director of Economics and Business, in addition to Acting Research Director at the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs. Dr. Juwita is one of the lead coordinators of Malaysia's All-Party Parliament Group on the Sustainable Development Goals. She has also served as a fellow in the Economics, Trade and Regional Integration Division of Malaysia's Institute for Strategic and International Studies, and as an economist at the Asia Desk OECD Development Center in Paris. Juwita earned a PhD in International Studies from Waseda University as well. All right, before we go into the panel discussion, I'd like to welcome In Xiao Long to give a brief presentation on the national climate policy and implications for the metal sectors. Okay, In, the floor is all yours now.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. Checking if everyone can see my slides.
Yep, we can all see it, all clear.
Okay, all good. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk from a higher level than the specifics of the panel that's going to go into the metals sector, but I'm going to touch on issues of concern for both banking as well as metals in relation to the regulatory, policy, and climate risks for all of you. And I'm going to help you try and figure out how to navigate national and international risks. So climate damages. There's a prominent study done by our professor Roger Rasia and several others that has estimated that the amount of damage caused by climate change to the ASEAN region by 2110 will amount to 151 trillion ringgit. 1/4 of that, 40 trillion ringgit, will be attributed to Malaysia alone. What is a trillion ringgit? It's a very big figure, of course, but to give you a sense, the 2021 GDP was 1.3 trillion ringgit, right? So nearly sort of 35 times more than annual GDP over a sort of 100-year period ahead. Looking at the shorter term, the kind of damage caused by climate change to Malaysia in the December 2021 floods amounted to 6.1 billion ringgit. What can you buy with 6 billion ringgit? Well, that was the cost of the national vaccine program. And this was just damage inflicted by 1 month of rain. And in actual fact, just a couple of days of rain, but really 1 month of damage and distress. So we can see that climate change has a very dramatic impact on us. It's not just in the short term, but also in the longer term. Now, you might think that I'm going to tell you here that the best thing that the metal sector and the banking sector can do is to cut emissions, but I'm actually not. The challenge for a country like Malaysia and a metal sector and banking sector in Malaysia is quite different. Why? Well, you don't only have to manage your emissions and your practices, you also have to manage your vulnerabilities. And Malaysia, as I'll get into later, is a climate vulnerable country. And managing your climate risk is a sort of holistic process of engaging with all these factors and having to know all these risks for your business. In terms of the overall environment and overall strategy, you would have to know the policies happening at the national and international level. You have to know your obligations that will flow down from these policies. You also need to know your data. What real climate impacts can you have versus speculative impacts? You have to know your compliance challenges. And ultimately, you have to articulate them to your regulators to ensure that you are getting regulation that is well suited to both your challenges and also your situation. Because the regulatory environment right now is being developed. It's quite fluid. And I'll go through, starting at the very top. We have the statement from the Prime Minister at the tabling of the 12th Malaysia Plan last September, where he declared that Malaysia is committed to becoming a carbon neutral country at the earliest in 2050. What does carbon neutral mean? The Malaysia Plan defines it as the balance between emitting carbon and absorbing carbon from the atmosphere in carbon sinks. Carbon sinks are things like forests, trees will absorb carbon dioxide. The ocean is also a form of a carbon sink. You may have heard of a term called net zero. Carbon neutral is considered slightly less rigorous than net zero because it just seems to address carbon dioxide, whereas the global warming effect is due to a range of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, hydrofluorocarbons, and so forth. Now, what can we note about this commitment made at the 12th Malaysia Plan in Parliament? Carbon neutral, okay, we defined that. At the earliest in 2050. At the earliest means not by 2050, as a number of companies are assuming. It's also a flexible deadline. It means it could be as early as 2050, it could be as late as 2100. That remains to be determined at the national level and perhaps at the international level. A few months later, in November 2021, our Minister for Environment and Water, Tuan Ibrahim Tuan Man, went to the Glasgow Climate Conference, COP26, as you may have heard from the news. And there, in his statement to the UN Assembly, he said that Malaysia aspires to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emission earliest by 2050. So this is a slight modification of what the Prime Minister committed to at the RMK. It could be seen as a slight upgrade because when you say net zero greenhouse gas emissions, then you're talking more than just carbon dioxide. You're talking up to 7 different greenhouse gases that could be managed Of course, this I want to point this out now because as businesses, this could eventually translate into compliance measures. You don't just have to manage carbon, you also have to manage methane and so on. So this is important to note. Once again, we see the inclusion of a flexible deadline, earliest by 2050. Now, this commitment's been made at the international level, so we can be held to account to this. It, however, has yet to be translated into national policy. We don't have any clear guidance as yet from the government about what is the national strategy. How fast do we proceed on trying to achieve net zero? Are we going to take a very aggressive approach, or are we going to take a more gentle approach? There is supposed to be a long-term decarbonization plan coming from the government, supposedly this year, but I suspect that it could well be pushed back. Now, while at the very top level we're seeing more general statements, we are seeing more specific statements coming out from the banking regulation sector, the financial sector. And there's an entity called JC3, which comprises Bank Negara Malaysia, the Securities Commission, and Bursa Malaysia. And so they form this joint committee of three. And they have been developing what they call the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD, sorry for the spelling mistake. And here is one of the first metrics that they are asking the financial sector and eventually the rest of the business sector to account for. Let's look at it up in the top corner. Recommendation M1, historical and current greenhouse gas emissions. This, by historical, they're going to mean from the very start of your business until the present. That's a considerable ask for a lot of businesses, especially SMEs. If you're a larger business, your likes of Petronas and so forth, maybe the larger GLCs, that may be reasonable to call in consultants to do this kind of assessment. But if you're an SME, this is going to be quite a challenge. And furthermore, these are not just guidelines at the moment. They're going to be pushing for mandatory adoption by 2024. That's just in 2 years' time. What do these measures mean? What do they imply? Absolute Scope 1 GHG emissions. Scope 1 is basically the stuff that's emitted within your business operations. Scope 2 is what you might buy from your electricity supplier. And there's an expectation overall to go for a stretch goal, which covers what they call Scope 3 emissions. And Scope 3 means your entire supply chain. So you could be expected to report on all three of these types of scopes of greenhouse gas emissions. This will be challenging. At the moment, it is draft. Unfortunately, they closed the consultation for this draft just before Raya. But I think there's still an opportunity to communicate if you feel that maybe this is beyond the scope and capacity and appropriateness for your sector. You communicate this to the JC3. But how can you argue your case? Let's get into that. We'll just touch on also international pressures very quickly. Some of you may have heard of the EU Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It's basically a carbon tax that the EU wants to apply to imports. At the same time, this hasn't been passed through the European Parliament. They're currently deadlocked. You can't assume that all countries in the world will also adopt this mechanism. It is controversial. We also have to scale it appropriately. The EU is not amongst the top 10 trading partners of Malaysia, and a UN study has suggested that it may have very little impact on reducing greenhouse gases. At the same time, not 100% of the Malaysian economy is exposed to international trade. Only 40% of Malaysian jobs are. Not all of them will be subject to ESG compliance, let alone emission reduction demands. So it's up to both businesses as well as the government to try and assess what is the true nature of climate risk, climate regulatory risk applying to the Malaysian economy. Why? Because only 100 companies are responsible for 71% of emissions, and there's only one Malaysian company in that 100, and that's Petronas, and they only contribute 0.69%. So it's important to note that not all countries are equally responsible for climate change. Only 10% of the world population, for example, is responsible for 50% of the emissions. And we see this in the founding UN Convention on Climate Change that was developed in 1992. There's a principle here of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in terms of responding to climate change. What does that mean? We have a shared common responsibility to protect the planet, but not everybody is equally responsible because some countries have emitted more greenhouse gases over the last 150 years than others. Malaysia is not one of those that has a very big footprint. Respective capabilities, different countries have different financial and technological capacity. Malaysia is not the same as the US, which is not the same as China. And this kind of chart shows you the kinds of historical breakdown of emissions. Malaysia is quite small. I've had to blow it up on the right here and circle it in green. You'll see that we, from 1751 to 2017, that's 1751, yeah? Malaysia was responsible for 0.33% of global emissions. The US, on the other hand, is responsible for 1/4, 25%. The EU, including the UK, is responsible for 22%. China, with 1 billion people, is responsible for 12.7%. So our carbon greenhouse gas footprint is relatively small. And by the UN Convention standards, we don't have the same obligations to reduce our emissions as something like the US or the EU. But why are historical emissions important? Because carbon dioxide persists in the atmosphere for a few hundred years. So if countries have been pumping that since the 1750s, it's going to have an impact today. And this is the kind of global warming and climate change impacts that we're seeing today. It's from previous emissions, not from current. Very quickly, touching on Malaysia's vulnerabilities, this chart developed by my colleague Wei Yang shows the orange dot on the left. You can see where Malaysia is cited, moderate vulnerability, but very little historical footprint. That's the vertical line, horizontal line on the bottom. US is the big outlier. This is not adjusted for population. The size of the circle indicates GDP. China is halfway to the US, but bear in mind they have a population far greater than the US, more than twice that size. So vulnerability is not the same as responsibility. Closing very quickly, we're going back to the requirements coming in, the mandatory requirements coming in. You need to communicate to your regulators if these requirements are appropriate or not. If not, they will become mandatory by 2024. 2024 is also another big deadline because that's when Malaysia is going to be expected to step up at the international level to offer more ambitious commitments at the UN Climate Conference in 2024. So know the policies, know your obligations, know your data, know your compliance challenges, and articulate them to your regulators because they are willing to listen. But at the moment, I think they haven't fully appreciated the challenges, particularly to the SME sector as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the presentation, Ian. So I believe that's helped set the scene for today's topic. So enough with the wait. I'll now pass the time over to our moderator, Dr. Juwita, to moderate the session. So Juwita, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, and thank you so much, Xiaolong, for that very informative presentation. So let me take a step back and try to ask a very fundamental question to our panelists today. Dato Sri Tai Hin Leng, just to gauge, why is it important for the metal industry to be ESG ready in the current economic context, and then also looking at the presentation that was just delivered?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Juwita. Well, I think for our metal industry in general, we're faced with two challenges. The first of all is the global statistics that says that 8% of the greenhouse gases globally, that's something close to a total figure of 38 gigatons in 2019. 8% of this is generated by the steel industry. So naturally, our industry comes with a stigma or negative connotation that we are a major polluter. Yeah, but that might not necessarily be the case, because if you look at the statistics that was just presented by Mr. Yin, the footprint in terms of greenhouse gases contribution as a whole, as a country to the rest of the world, Malaysia actually is a very small footprint. But the other challenge that I would like to mention this morning is that there are many other players that come from abroad. In the Malaysian context, particularly these players or manufacturers are the migration of Chinese-owned steel companies that come and set up facility, massive facility in our beloved country, and they in turn contribute generously to the emission problem of this country. And they go under radar because the framework that's applicable to foreign investors are not quite the same as what is applicable to local companies, or in particular Malaysian companies that are listed. Malaysian companies that are listed are subject to issuing our sustainability report. We are subject to a far higher level of scrutiny by the authorities. But all these Chinese companies that I know, they have come on our shore and set up a massive manufacturing facility. And they remain 100% private and 100% foreign owned. So they don't, most of the time, don't come under the radar of the government in terms of sustainability or ESG practices at this moment. So that would be my 2 cents worth this morning as far as our industry, our sector. But there's always it always depends on the initiative of individual company. There is a path forward if you look hard enough. Stakeholders are willing to support, based on our experience, the transformation to a greener industry for the individual company, for them to be more green and to help them reduce their emission. Stakeholders are there to support if the message is clearly presented to the stakeholder. But it all starts at the core, which is the management level. They have to make up their mind. They must first have knowledge and then chart a path forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. What about you, sir, Dato' Lim Hong Kai? Why do you think it's important for the businesses, especially in the metal industry subsector, to be ESG ready in a current economic context, post-pandemic and into the endemic phase?
Okay, thank you, Doctor. I think ESG, we also cover the social and governance. I think today, I think that part is not really an issue for this steel industry, but environmental is something that is much more challenging, as what Dr. Sri Tai has already put it. Metal industry or steel industry is one of the key contributor to this carbon emission. And right now, honestly, there is no proven solution to this. Everyone is talking about hydrogen based. Even steel industry, we are talking about hydrogen based blast furnace, DRI plant. Okay, for steel industry, the biggest carbon generator are the upstream player, the iron making especially. Then they're still making the level of carbon emission will be substantially lower if we are going on a electric arc furnace base. Then the mid and downstream will be a lot lower. So currently the focus worldwide, the steel industry worldwide is focusing on how to resolve this at the iron making level, but there's no proven technology yet. Okay, everyone talk about hydrogen, just like hydrogen car. Of course, even within hydrogen, there's green and blue hydrogen. Which is which? And the cost of hydrogen today, if we were to use that, I think maybe you expect another 4 times, maybe 6 to 10 times higher price in a steel. That is the kind of things. So it's not really economically viable. Of course, JFE, the second largest steel mill in from Japan, one of the largest in the world. They actually come up with a presentation and they say they expect maybe another 8 years down the road. Hopefully, this hydrogen base will be something that is become a viable option. Until then, this remain a big challenge. But on the other hand, the key worry about is what Dr. Sri just now has also mentioned. There's huge influx of foreign investment into not just Malaysia but Southeast Asia. The last count, there's 94 million ton of capacity that is upcoming within the whole Southeast Asia, Philippines, Indonesia, and to a lesser extent Malaysia. And about 90% foreign investment from one particular country. And we know that particular country is very aggressive in climbing down, in trying to achieve the carbon neutral by 2060. Okay, they have started the process moving, and we can see the private sectors are moving out and setting up the base here. So we are eagerly awaiting our government's clear direction on this, because yes, end of September, our Prime Minister announced we will be carbon neutral earliest by 2050, and the policy will be announced. I can't remember, he said within 1 year or by end of 2022. So honestly, up until today, I don't know how and what is our government, how we are going to meet this, and what is the carbon tax government is going to put up and all this, because this will be a cost to us. Now, if our government suddenly whack 100, don't talk about 100 euro or 100 US, 100 ringgit per ton of carbon emission is a lot. But if they say it's 2 ringgit, then it's different consideration, because that steel industry is not something, especially upstream, we cannot decide things overnight. There's a long gestation period. If we want to switch from one source to another source, or one technology to another technology. So we hope whatever we support our government's initiative, but it's just that we need to bear in mind we need a reasonable time frame, because around this region, China is talking about 2060. India, after hard pressing, announced 2070. Indonesia 2060. Singapore non-committal. They didn't announce by when they will be carbon neutral. Thailand between 2065 to 2070, if I'm not wrong. Okay, so Malaysia is the most aggressive. Of course, we have a little clause earliest by 2050. But I have to be very frank, this kind of ambiguity also leaves us, as a businessman, in a very difficult position. Where do I expect? What do I expect? How do we plan our investment and chart our path forward? So these are the things, a great challenge facing the steel industry moving forward as far as this carbon emission is concerned. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that frank sharing. Encik Shahrul, not putting you in the spotlight just yet. Let's take a step back and see why is it important for the government to support the industry to be ESG ready in this current economic context. What is your take on that?
Thank you, Dr. Juwita. Hi, everybody, Dr. Lim and Dr. Sri. So based on the statement by these two gentlemen, yeah, because they are saying that they are maybe because of the foreign investors coming into Malaysia with the $1 billion of investment. At the same time, they also bring in what we call this maybe so-called pollution to our land. But we need to see on the perspective of investment versus our environment as well. But as we know that the current investment coming into Malaysia is more on the what we call via blast furnace route. Yeah. So now, if you are talking about blast furnace route versus what we call the EAF, so in terms of the raw material is also different. The difference between the inputs of blast furnace using iron ore and the electric arc furnace is using scrap. In terms of ESG and in terms of sustainable goals development, so we are talking about, if you are talking about circular economy, then it become scrap is the what we call the most important inputs, yeah, compared to iron ore. And then based on the study in terms of carbon emission, correct me if I'm wrong, Datuk Sri Tai and Datuk Lim, yeah, blast furnace emit more carbon than the electric arc furnace and whatnot. So in terms of MIDA as the evaluation and the promotion agencies of investment, whether from FDI or DDI, we do take consideration the what we call the spill-off effect to the country. And the evaluation of manufacturing license also need to see the spill-off effect to the country, since our guideline mentioned that all manufacturing license need to evaluate, we need to see on the factors such as the high value added, high technology, energy efficiency, and environmental friendly. In terms of, if let's say we are talking about the current trend of the world now, as mentioned by Datuk Lim, China vigorously what we call implement the carbon neutrality by 2060. As such, they unofficially the companies which would like to expand, they are coming into our country because we are still promoting all this iron and steel industry. Even though current what we call the current guideline for approving manufacturing license, also we are talking about the positive and negative list. We are talking about the overcapacity of the production in the country, but we still need investment. As such, we need to be for MIDA and MITI, we need to be sitting in the middle to protect all these local manufacturers as well. At the same time, we are promoting investment into our country. So the best way that we can do now is, since we are talking about environment, we are talking about sustainable development goals. At the same time, we are also need investment to the country. So in terms of policy, we don't have any specific policy for iron and steel for ESG. Yeah, but bear with me that currently MIDA and MITI, actually MITI is doing the study for this, what we call a foresight study for iron and steel. At the same time, this foresight iron and steel will be used for the formulating the IMP, the new IMP. The foresight study also, this two gentlemen is also a committee in formulating, in doing this study by MITE. But I believe that any policy involving iron and steel or other industries, the government will talk to the stakeholders, including the industry as well, to formulate the new policy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that very enlightening answer. Let's move on to Mr. Ivan. Why is it important for the banks to support the industries to adopt sustainable and also ESG-friendly business practices, in your view?
Well, I guess in our role as a bank, I guess we have the responsibility, to assist on this front, especially on carbon neutrality. As far as the bank is concerned, we are committed to achieve carbon neutrality in 2050 as well, in line with the Malaysian government, right? So we have introduced various initiatives by we have a certain milestone for the bank. Yeah, by 2026, we have committed to reduce so-called the goal of achieving 15 to 25% reduction, and by 2031, 40 to 50% reduction, and so on. Right. So for internally in the bank, yeah, we've also committed that we monitor and measure the scope 1 and 2 boundaries well throughout all our Malaysian operations as well, right? So last year we have implemented ESG policy throughout the bank, especially on sustainable lending, right? But our approach is more of an inclusion approach, to assist the client, to work with the client, on this sustainability journey. Right, as far as the bank's appetite is concerned, yes, what Dato Lim has pointed out is very, very true. China has been reducing their so-called capacity in China, but that entails a huge opportunity for all the steel players in Malaysia. Directly is a direct impact, right? So as far as the banks is concerned, yes, we are very supportive, towards the steel industry on this front, right? When we will continue to support, we has been and we will continue to support the financing of demand of the steel players. But yes, with regards to the so-called ESG framework, we'll be implementing our monitoring and adoption throughout our clients, right? Additionally, I mean, we have been very supportive and towards various programs of Bank Negara as well, right? Internally, we have hired industry specialists in consulting, right, to assist the client, right, to evaluate, right, whether the because at the end of the day, like especially what Dato Lim has mentioned, at the end of the day, we have to look at the viability as well. A balanced view, right? If we cannot swing too much towards the pendulum, it's all about environment. At the end of the day, it's profitability for the company as well, especially listed company. The market reacts to that, right? So yes, we have an industry specialist to advise on this front on the viability, incorporating all this renewable energy towards their business operations, right? Just to give you a feel of how supportive the bank is, over the last 2 years, the bank has supported in renewable energy front. We have given out at least 2.4 billion worth of loan to the industry. Supported about 150 clients, and with regards to the Bank Negara GTFS fund, we are one of the largest supporters. We supported about 30 projects over the last 2 years, right? We have participated strongly in the LCTF initiative as well. So yes, long story short, yes, the bank is very, very supportive, and we are committed towards this initiative.
Thank you, sir. Before I go around again for another round of questions and discussion, I would like to remind the audience to please ask away your questions through the Slido app so that we can ask really important questions to the speaker as well as the panelists today. So on that note, I'm going to rope in our speaker. Yin Xiaolong, you mentioned that in your presentation that the EU carbon tax hasn't been passed by the EU Parliament, but don't you think that since it is a higher standard of doing business, and which will in time be passed, or the standard will be adopted not just by the EU, but by, for example, free trade agreements around the world, don't you feel that even though it hasn't been passed, that smaller countries like Malaysia who are exporting goods and selected services should start its effort by adopting ESG solutions so that we can be competitive in the medium to long term? What is your take on that?
Thanks, Juwita, for the question. Going back to what I said earlier about the EU carbon border tax, it's not certain, we cannot be 100% certain that it will pass through the European Parliament. We also can't be certain in what form will it pass. Right? We don't know the rate and level of the tax. Will it be sufficient to induce a change in behavior, as economists often hope, with price signals? Or will it be something that, you know, it's just a mild little speed bump that we can afford to pay? Also, we have to ask, what is our actual trade risk exposure to the European Union? It's not even within our top 10 trading partners. I know the recent case of oil palm is very high in people's minds, but not everything we export is oil palm. So we have to be very specific about it. We can't make regulation, we can't make strategy on the basis of speculation. I think the EU would like to enjoy the power to globalize all of its legislation 100%, but you know that's not the case, right? You look at the history of globalization of legislation. EU was there early on because of colonialism and so forth, but right now it's not so simple. We can take them to the WTO. Other countries also impose it. They can also be held at the WTO. So it's not to say that we shouldn't do any kind of improvements, but the question is, are these improvements fair? Are they effective? UNCTAD, which is a UN body focusing on trade and development, has assessed the EU proposed carbon border adjustment, and they found that it's actually going to have very little effect on reducing emissions worldwide. It's more deemed as a kind of punitive tax, right? It's maybe it's protectionism in new bottles. We will have to see because we haven't seen the final shape of it yet. At the same time, going back to the data I shared, only 40% of the Malaysian jobs are exposed to trade. Not all that 40% of Malaysian jobs will be exposed to the EU or its carbon border adjustment mechanism. Once again, we have to assess. Effort has to be put into making a very accurate assessment on this, right? Or else we will overcompensate. And my fear is there is some tendency to overcompensate amongst regulation right now. And that could be economically punishing for our competitiveness at the moment, because we don't have the same financial and technological capability as the EU or the US. We have particular circumstances that we come to, and we have to make the best that we can. And there are a lot of pressures on industries like the metal industry.
Okay, thank you for that very well-rounded answer. Dato' Srita, you mentioned that there are I wouldn't want to call it double standard, but different standards when it comes to foreign metal industry and local metal industry. And I think we will ask Maida and Sharul to get back to that question. But then what I wanted to link it to is, are there any foreign practices or are there any foreign policies from abroad that are applicable to the Malaysian context in terms of standardizing different regulations for foreign and also local investors? What is your take on that?
Well, maybe I should clarify. It's not so much the absolute difference of ESG policy that you have a divergence of policy for both foreign against local company. What I meant actually was that there are a lot of foreign investment that come into this country, and also there are many local companies that are not required to comply to any ESG practices, right? And in terms of, say, for example, manifesting that practice in a annual sustainability report, what is required so far in this country is that only listed companies and a handful of GLCs do reporting to Bursa reporting in the form of sustainability report. So that's the point I'm trying to make, that listed companies are subject to some level of scrutiny as far as ESG practices are concerned. But all the private Malaysian companies, including a whole host of foreign companies, which are gigantic in size, come under the radar because there is no regulation requiring them to submit even the basic sustainability report. That's my point. Yeah. As far as practices abroad, of course, there are so many examples that you can mimic, on how you can encourage absolute transformation of a country's industry to become more sustainable by reducing emission. I mean, you do not need to look very far. I mean, our huge neighbor to the north, China, they themselves, due to regulation and the leadership provided by their government, in fact, the last 7 years, they've been able to reduce 40% of their emission through reduction of coal burning and the conversion of a lot of their vehicles to EV. And this 40% reduction is actually equivalent to a 44% reduction that the United States only managed to achieve since 1970. Yeah, so it took the US 30 years since the Clean Air Act was passed in 1970. It took the US 30 years to reduce 44%. But because of the leadership and the commitment of the government of China, it took them 7 years to reduce 40% of their greenhouse gases emission. Okay, so the point is that it's not a matter of which model you should adopt, but it's to have the political will and the wisdom, and again, the support of all stakeholders to help the country or any country transform to a greener economy, and to be able to either to become more carbon neutral or at least go towards net zero carbon. Yeah. Okay. And maybe if I just like to just clarify some of these terminologies that's been presented for the benefit of the public. Terminologies like carbon neutral. Actually, what we're talking, and why is it different from net zero carbon? I find from my experience engaging with the public and industry, these terms are almost used equivalently, but really there's a significant difference. Carbon neutral actually refers to a policy of not increasing carbon emission and of achieving carbon reduction through offset. It means if you come to a certain level, 2050, whatever your emission, you just stop there. And then you will also have to find what we call sequestration of carbon sequestration. That means you have to capture, remove the carbon from the air and store it. Okay, so the rate of storage, removal and storage, and the amount of carbon emission that you emit has got to be equivalent or equal. That's what we mean by carbon neutral. But on the other hand, net zero carbon is something which is also very interesting and very different. Net zero carbon means making changes. That means proactive initiative by companies, by countries to reduce carbon emission. It's not just allowing emission to graduate to a certain level, then you stop, and then you balance it out by the carbon sequestration. This one is more interesting, I feel, because you actually make a proactive initiative to reduce carbon emission, yeah, to the lowest amount. And the final amount that you technologically cannot reduce further or economically becomes so expensive and so prohibitive, the final minute amount, you will then do an offsetting by carbon sequestration. Okay, so fundamentally, these are two different approaches. Why is it important that I mention this? Because it affects the strategy of companies on how they are going about to achieve the carbon emission, or how they will go about making their business more environmentally friendly. There's a fundamental difference here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that clear explanation. Riding on that answer, Dato' Lim, how does China's new environmental policies on steel affect Malaysia's steel industry on the ground? What is your take on that? Are we impacted?
Okay, the clearest sign that we have seen is a lot of investment into Southeast Asia, not just Malaysia, as I mentioned just now. What is outstanding, the last count is 94 million ton. Just for the public's information, that is more than double up the existing capacity within Southeast Asia. So, and 90% of these investments are from China, okay? This is one immediate sign we see, huge influx of investment. Okay, and like just how I say, we don't know our government's policy on this, how to achieve, we want to achieve carbon neutral by 2050. What is the policy, the clear policy come out, then we can react to it. But at the moment, this influx of huge investment is putting a big pressure on the local players, not just on Malaysian, but the whole Southeast Asian existing local players, because it's more than double up the capacity. This is one clear sign. Of course, on the other hand, it also gives opportunity for certain steel mill who are competitive enough to start exporting steel to China. Okay, you can see the Malaysia steel export tonnage surged substantially from 2019 onwards. That means 2020, sorry to be more, 2020, 2021, yes, surged to a very large number. And most of these export were mainly to China. Okay, so on one hand, there's this potential threat because of all this influx of investment into this region. On the other hand, immediately is give the opportunity to the existing player who are competitive to start exporting the steel to China. So this is what immediately the industry is feeling now. But really, just like what I say, we are not against the policy or this carbon neutral. It's just that we need a clear direction how our government wants to move it. With that, only we can start planning what is the next step we got to do. Okay, so that is the biggest challenge that we are facing now, beside this influx of huge foreign investment into this region. Okay.
Thank you, Dato' Lim. Dato' Sri, I'll get back to you, but I would really like to have Maida's intervention here. And Sharo, you mentioned that, yes, there needs to be a balance between attracting FDIs and also protecting the environment. But then it goes back to what was said before by the panelists, that there seems to be different requirements in sustainability reporting. So is there, are there any plans by the government to standardize these requirements in the near future, given the government support in adhering to the sustainability or ESG goals that are already set in at the international level? What is your take on that?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Juwita. Based on the statement by Dato' Sri Tai just now, because only listed companies are required to submit the sustainable report to Bursa. So, but as I mentioned just now, currently we are formulating the new iron and steel policy based on the study done by Mike, the foresight study, and to include ESG factor is in the what we call the new iron and steel policy. But I'm not sure whether the government would like to what we call to implement the ESG to what we call across the board, across the board, whether to small companies, the mid-tier company, and also or to foreign companies or DDI. But normally we don't differentiate between FDI and DDI. Now we are talking about, if let's say a statement by Datuk Lim just now, we are talking about investment. At the same time, we are also talking about environment. And then based on 2019, since 2019, we can see there is a huge number of export of steel from Malaysia, because before that, our steel industry is just fragmented to the local market, and then most of the iron and steel is for the construction materials. So since 2019, we can see the export majority suspected from the what we call the investment from the new company from China, because they build a huge plant to produce the long product for construction materials, and at the same time they are targeting for export. Since our market is so small, so now they can export back to China. But in terms of technology of these China companies, they are also at the same time bringing new technologies into the country. We can see that from the proposal and real means that currently the plant is in operation. They can capture the steam, the waste steam, and then they convert into electricity. You can use back the steam. It means that they can renew back the energy and then to replace electricity. This is one of the technology that they bring it into Malaysia. But this investment is not cheap. Whether our local companies are able to invest in this new technology, that it depends on the industry as well. So if we are talking about the new technology, the new investment versus the current investment, we are talking about, we know that the new investment is mostly coming from China for iron and steel, but they also bring in a new technology, as I mentioned. Based on the proposal, they plan to do up what we call a state-of-the-art technology. Based on the one of the company is proposing to do as the same as the China main what we call Bao Steel plant in China. So now we are talking about the investment, whether our companies really ready to invest in the new technology to comply with the new ESG requirement. Because we know that, as mentioned by Datuk Sri Tai, we don't claim that we don't claim that our steel industry is so clean, but based on Mr. Yin just now mentioned that our carbon footprint is still less than the developed countries. But now, if we are looking forward, whether our local companies are ready to invest in new technology in the production project, in their project as well. That's it. Thank you, Rita.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ivan, again, coming back to the bank's perspective, how can the business leverage on the highly recyclable nature of metals in the current situation? And how would this impact them as businesses in terms of compliance, cost compliance? What is your take on that? Thank you. You are muted, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the iron and steel industry relies significantly on primary energy. So I guess this is one of the largest energy consumers in the as far as the manufacturing industry is concerned. But simultaneously, you can see that this industry produces a lot of heat loss, right? So I guess recycling of the heat recycling of the discharge of the heat, that's very, very important, with regards to the renewables. And in this industry, there's a lot of so-called opportunity, right, for the usage of scrap. So effectively, utilizing scrap is renewable energy. So-called is recycling, in itself, right? So I guess the greater usage of the scrap, mixture of scrap, that will definitely help, right? But more importantly, I guess it's more of the cost, right? The cost of producing, cost of production is increasing, especially with the increasing cost of energy, right? With regards to Malaysia, they've already announced that there's a surcharge, and I guess with the rising energy costs, I guess coal prices. If you look at the disruption with the Russia and Ukraine war currently, inherently, the coal has increased. Hence, it affects the power generation cost as well, right? So it's I guess it's imperative for the steel manufacturers to embrace so-called the ESG compliance. I find that it is not an option anymore today. It used to be an option. I find that today it's a necessity, right? And as far as the bank is concerned, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, of our commitment, right, to become carbon neutral, in 2050, as recent as this year, right? What Hong Leong Bank has done is Hong Leong Bank has so-called embarked on the so-called environment conservation together with the Malaysian Nature Society. We have planted 15 hectares of mangroves rehabilitation, right? So this is part and parcel of our initiative to have a carbon offset, like what Dato Sri Thai has mentioned, carbon offset, right, with regard to footprint.
Thank you, sir. I will now invite Dato Sri to also share with us his intervention. You had your hand raised, sir. Go ahead.
Right. Not to sound too long-winded, but I just want to touch on a few points that was brought up by Dr. Lim and Encik Shahrul. Actually, it is noteworthy to see that foreign investments are encouraged to come into this country. FDI, together with domestic investments, are also important for the growth of the country. My view, actually, is that the quality of foreign investment that is being promoted by MIDA, it's beyond reproach. And there's nothing to say that to criticize. I think MIDA is doing a very good job. And in fact, most of these new products we don't produce in the country anyway. Number two is that even if they do produce some products that are similar to what we Malaysian producers produce, but MIDA is careful enough to ensure that the guardrails are put in place, that these new manufacturers don't overwhelm or oversupply the local market. So the policies of the government, particularly the last 2 years, have been very careful to ensure that we still can bring in the best technology from abroad, but yet again allow some breathing space for local manufacturers to catch up. So that, I think, we really need to express our appreciation to MITI and MIDA for their cooperation and wisdom to guide us through this very transformative period. As far as the opportunities are concerned, I'd just like to mention that as China is reducing greenhouse emission, they have to buy more expensive raw material, higher grade iron ore, in order when they produce steel, the emissions are lower. So generally, the cost of production in China is, because of these green initiatives, have become more expensive, and it actually opens up a new opportunity for Malaysian steel mills to export to China also, other than the fact that there are a lot of other Chinese steel mills that have been transplanted into our soil, and they are also exporting back to China. And also, as far as local companies, I think I can speak for our company as far as this ESG journey is concerned. Despite more competition initially from some mills from China, we have invested since 2017 around 150 million ringgit, and we have been able to reduce our cost of production. But equally important is that we've been able to reduce our carbon footprint. In the past, we used to generate around or emit per ton of steel that we produce around 1,350 kilogram of CO2. After that investment that we've made the last 3 years, we are now emitting close to only 700 kilogram of CO2 per ton of steel that we're producing. And it's noteworthy to say that with the support from Hong Leong Bank, with their financial package, this year we're putting in additional technology that would see that carbon emission reduced from 700 kilograms per metric ton down to close to 600 kilogram per metric ton. And all this is done with cost savings, other than reduction of greenhouse gases, but we have actually cost savings. It improves our cash flow, and we are comfortably able to pay back the facility that is provided by Hong Leong Bank to us. So I think that it's noteworthy to mention. We certainly appreciate the support from the banks in order that are supporting financing and supporting green transformation for industry. And we have the first, we do, and we are privileged to be one of the first-hand experiencing these financing package firsthand. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I invite Ye Xiaolong for his intervention. You had your hand raised as well. Go ahead.
Thanks, Juita. I think I found the interventions made by the others very interesting. I just want to zoom out again for some context, because we focused a lot, once again, on what the steel industry here can do to cut their emissions, right? And why? That's to supposedly fight the battle to prevent catastrophic global warming. But let's think back to the data I shared earlier. If we want to make the best stab at stopping global warming, climate change on a global level, we have to target the biggest emitters. The biggest emitters are the US, the EU, and emerging giants from developing countries, right? That's not something the steel industry here can be expected to deliver on. That is something our government can do to make representations at the international level in negotiations and in alliance with other like-minded countries, also developing countries. So I think we need to be clear about the fair apportionment of responsibility. Now, that's not to rule out opportunities that exist to have win-wins, like Dr. Sri Tai just mentioned. You can make financial gains by pursuing efficiency in production, in emission, and so forth. At the same time, climate doesn't just present itself as an emissions challenge. It's also a vulnerability challenge. I don't know what the Malaysian steel industry has done to assess its vulnerability to climate change, your vulnerability to floods, heat stress, coastal erosion, so forth, any of the common factors expected from Malaysia. Very few companies in Malaysia have. Petronas has assessed that 10% of its infrastructure is vulnerable to climate. The Oil Palm Ministry has done an assessment that the area of cultivation vulnerable to floods could increase by 400% in the next few decades. That is a major threat that needs to be addressed, and it's a cost implication as well. At the national level, and this refers to what Dr. Lim has mentioned several times, we still lack concrete plans to chart out strategies for all the given sectors, right? How much burden is the steel sector expected to carry? How much do you have to pursue net zero or carbon neutral, as opposed to the oil and gas sector, as opposed to the cement sector, which are also very high emitters, right? Where is the low-hanging fruit to be found? Will your emissions be covered by our national sinks, right? The forests that we continue to have and hold and conserve. At the same time, In terms of emissions reduction plan, there isn't one yet. There's also no plan in terms of national adaptation to climate change. That's currently held up. It could take another few years to emerge, but it's also very important for Malaysian industry to understand its climate vulnerabilities. Steel industry, I don't know how many of you guys are in flood-prone areas, for example. It is a concern. It is something that needs to be managed, and it can be very disruptive because your supply chain may be vulnerable too. The ports are also vulnerable. It's very important for government to have a clear strategy on this because there could be a lot of costs. And I hinted at some of the costs in the first slide of my presentation. 40 trillion is the current estimate. So it's very important for all the ministries. I would refer to MIDA on this as well to assess, because where you direct investment to set up the industrial park, so forth, they can also be vulnerable. I don't know whether the assessments have been done on those areas too. Right, Shahrukh laughing. So at the same time, it's one thing not to know and not be prepared. It's another thing to know that you have a problem and still not be prepared. So we do have to take action. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We have about 15 minutes left, 15 to 20 minutes left for a Q&A. We do have a few questions from Slido, but just to get the ball rolling. And again, how would you motivate companies to be ESG ready? So our audience, one of the audiences is saying they seem to be happy where they currently are. So what is your take on that to any panelist who would like to take that question? So the question is, how would you motivate companies to be ESG ready, especially when they seem happy where they are currently? Okay, I see Dato Sri Tai having his hand up. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I think, the way to motivate companies is, first of all, make them aware that the pressing issue of our common problem, if greenhouse gases or climate change or global warming is not addressed. I think the clarity of the message, I think other than obviously the impetus by government policy is critical, but I think the shared common values of companies, they need to understand that one way or the other, it is a problem that they can't avoid. Yeah. So and also I think is also from the financial sector. We are seeing a lot of not so much of a push factor, but a pull factor from, say, the banks. I think the banks have been able to play a significant role, both domestic and foreign banks, in encouraging their customers to have more green practices or ESG, or to have better disclosure for the ESG practices. They do get additional points when it comes to their credit review, right? So I think it is some motivation factors are already out there, and I think companies need to start to engage, because this is an inevitability. It's better to engage early than late. Yeah, and if you are the first initiative, first mover, I think it is you will afford yourself more time to identify the right form of transformation, technological transformation, and to get yourself ready in terms of sustainability reporting. Yeah. So, and also from the government standpoint, you can also get say recognized in the Bursa's index, what they call the FTSE for Good index. And this is an index set up by Bursa that if you qualify, if you comply to very high levels of ESG, you will be accepted as a member of the index. And that improves your visibility and your attractiveness to foreign investment. Yeah. I mean, for foreign investors that say, for example, they come from pension funds or that are from the States, for example, and if they look at the fact that you comply and you're part of this index, then they will buy your shares, you see. But again, this is for listed companies. But for private companies, I think, it is important that government-led initiative In fact, in our foresight study together with the government, Malaysia Steel Association, we have actually have proposed, other than and it's been accepted and adopted by the foresight study, which is helmed by MITI, to have ESG as a prominent feature as part of the next 10-year steel sector development plan. But in addition to that, we actually are proposing that to begin with, whether, for private companies that are not listed, if you have a workforce of more than 500 person, you should start reporting on your annual sustainability report. That at least is a beginning. But you need to take the first step. Then you can see, once you have the initiative and the knowledge, then when you engage your other stakeholder, be it suppliers, investors, you could be a private company, but there could be investors from abroad that are prepared to invest in your company simply because you have demonstrated commitment and a competent degree of ESG practices within your company. So you need to take the first step, and then stakeholders the reward will come, but you need to have the confidence to take the first step and engage and be engaged in this, in all things that has to do with the best green practices and sustainability. The journey must start with the company and must start now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that very strong message and mapping out the benefits of compliance. I see that Mr. Ivan has his hand up. Go ahead with your intervention, sir.
I guess, it's easy for everyone to say, how is it relevant to me, right? And push the responsibility to the government. Government has to do this, government has to do that. But I feel strongly that it starts with awareness. It starts with awareness. It starts with your realization of responsibility, as in how would I want my next generation or the next generation to live, right? It starts with that, right? You can't really put dollar and cents into it, but yes, businesses being businesses, yeah, at the end of the day, it's P&L. That's why I say, as far as the bank is concerned, yeah, it's imperative that we should not penalize, so-called, the pendulum shouldn't shift too much, yeah, towards, hey, you have to achieve this for the ESG. It has to be practical. It has to be relevant as well, right? So that's the reason why for Hong Leong Bank, we have announced our ESG, and it's really skewed towards how do we help the client through this journey, and not just a unilateral decision. Hey, you have to achieve this by this date, right? We have to be practical as well. So over and above that, if you look at the government, yeah, Bank Negara has launched various. Let's come back to the bank first. For us, we have launched a 900 million a few months ago, 900 million bonds, yeah, ESG so-called related. And as far as Bank Negara is concerned, they have launched various initiatives to support and assist especially the SME segment, like GTS, like what I mentioned earlier, GTFS and LCTF so-called facilities. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir. The next question, I think I can ask Dato' Lim to answer this question from our audience. Who will be the key stakeholders in Malaysia to push the ESG agenda, especially for the metal sector? The floor is yours, sir.
Okay, I think all stakeholders are responsible to push for this. Just how I keep mentioning about the government side, the policy is not clear. That's because for upstream players, actually we are responsible to invest, to be responsible for this carbon emission, but we need to know the clear direction. Because upstream players, when we invest, we are talking about hundreds of millions to billions. So we also need to present to our bankers what is a return and all this in order to gain their support. So that's why I'll say we are the main people who are responsible for this. We are the main stakeholders to really push for this ESG agenda, but we need the support from others, especially the authorities. You need to set the rules right. Then we know how to react. Otherwise, we really don't know how to present, because when talk to bankers, we also don't know how to justify. Of course, the smaller investment, we also have started. In fact, Anju, we have started the green energy division within us to start pushing for this. But then that is to generate enough, or hopefully generate some carbon credit to offset what we are generating from the steel mill side. But the main focus of us is still how we can reduce our emission in the steel mill, our core business, substantially. And this one, of course, we need clearer guideline in order for us to push. Rather than now we are doing the smaller initiative, but the main one we still need to wait. So I would say the stakeholder, everyone from the company, the authority, these two should be the key stakeholders as far as I'm concerned. And the main one is still the company. We must really push for it. Okay.
Thank you, sir. The next question is on Chinese technology and also government's incentives. So I think this question would be aimed to you, Encik Sharul. With China companies exposing new technology in the metal industry, and again to the high amount of investments coming in, are there any government initiatives to assist the local players to adopt these new technologies and solutions on the ground? Go ahead, sir.
Okay, Dr. Yuta, since we as I mentioned to you just now, the new investment coming from China, they are installing with this all what we call state-of-the-art facilities for this regeneration of steam, to convert it to electricity, in terms of to comply with all the requirements by our DOE. So in terms of local companies, whether they are able to equip themselves with this new ESG requirement, or for the clean tech environment. So MIDA, as a promotion agencies, we do have what we call incentive, yeah, for the local companies or for the foreign companies, in terms of what we call tech incentive, yeah, for this to upgrade themselves, or what we call the green investment tax allowance, whereby investment tax allowance of 100% on qualifying expenditure, and then the allowance can be offset against 70% of the statutory income for each year. So it means that we do have incentive for the local companies to upgrade themselves, whether to install what we call in terms of to make them green, yeah, to make them green. And then if, like say, we are talking about to renewable energy, yeah, that's why we have this incentive to assist our local companies. We are not talking about grants now. Because grants depend on the capacity of the country. But now we are talking about incentive. Yes, there are incentive for upgrading themselves in terms of green. So now at the same time we do also we do have our current incentive for recycling. Yeah, we do recycling, as mentioned by Mr. Ivan just now. Scrap will become precious this time. So now it become what we call the term used as urban mining. What is urban mining? Yeah, we are using scrap. We are finding scrap to use scrap as inputs to means that to less dependent on the iron ore. But now we know that in terms of policy, how to maintain the scrap in our country. As such, we have reintroduced back the export duty of 15% for export of scrap. So at the same time, we still maintain the export license for our scrap, just to maintain the usage of scrap in the country. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Dato' Lim and Dato' Sri. Yeah, because we are in the same time to formulate this, what we call this iron and steel policy. That's why, as mentioned by Dato' Lim just now, just to answer, in terms of formulating the new policy for the government always talk to the stakeholders, the industries, in formulating this our national policy. I cannot talk in terms of other ministries, but for iron and steel, MIDA is involved directly in formulating the new iron and steel policy with MITI. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question goes to Yin Xiaolong. It's on open data sources. So this is a question from Slido. What are the open data sources that the public can access to better learn and understand about the Malaysian carbon targets and initiatives to reduce our carbon footprint? So this is more of a general question for you. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I mean, one easily accessible source of data is called Our World in Data. It's an Oxford University-run website. The big tree chart I showed earlier is from there. So it's always useful to look at comparisons, not just Malaysia alone, but Malaysia in comparison to other countries, to see where we stand, to benchmark. That is one major repository. In terms of domestic data, there's not a lot available in terms of tracking us towards a target. The government hasn't made clear what our trajectory will be, and given that the deadline for the achieving carbon neutral net zero is flexible, it's going to be, well, it's more theoretical rather than a practical endeavor right now. But go to Our World in Data. You can also find other sources for greenhouse gas emissions by country across the internet, but that one's quite well researched.
Okay, thank you. My last question is for Mr. Ivan before we wrap up. If the government were to impose bolder policy on carbon emission, how ready do you think are the industry players in the metal industry, coming from the bank's perspective? The floor is yours, sir.
I don't really know how to answer that actually, but all I can say, I mean, it's because of industry readiness. So it's up to players like Mars Steel. It has to push. It has to be an internal company push, yeah, to do this, right? As I mentioned earlier, some things are not all about dollar and cents. It's more of something that we need to do. Right, as I mentioned earlier, it's not an option anymore to be ESG compliant, especially environmental. Yeah, it's a necessity. So, but what I can say is the bank, yeah, it's very supportive of any or all initiative with regards to ESG. And like I've mentioned earlier, over the last 2 years, we've already approved more than 2.4 billion worth of facilities, yeah, towards this cause, right, renewable energy cause. So, yeah.
Thank you for that attempt. So now we need to wrap up, but before we close the session, I would like to invite all of our panelists to give the last words to the public. What is it that is needed to be done in the next couple of years so that we are all ESG ready and also competitive? So I'll start with Dato' Sri Tai. Any last words from you?
Yeah, just 2 points. One is that for those companies that have not started their sustainability journey, get going. It's not very cost prohibitive. You know, start talking to some consultant, try to understand what are the scopes that are involved in getting your sustainability report out, and what are the main pillars, or what are the frameworks that you would consider to comply with regards to your ESG within the company. The second point, I suppose, just a quick takeaway is that in the steel industry, particularly in the construction industry, I would just like to leave this message with all of you. We're talking about the emissions of CO2 gases, and on the other side of the equation, you have in terms of carbon sequestration, which is the capture and storage of carbon. The steel that a lot of us produce in Malaysia, the steel manufacturers, a lot of the steel obviously goes into highways, concrete highways, and building. Now, it is scientifically proven, just like to leave this with you, is that the carbonization of concrete, of urban building, can actually continuously absorb carbon dioxide in the air and has carbon fixation function. That means if you build a building or if you build a flyover, because it's made from concrete and steel, through time, it actually absorbs carbon dioxide. So that's a good thing. So continue to use steel, continue to build your buildings. It's not really bad for the environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Dato' Lim, any last messages that you want the public to know, the businesses to know as well?
Well, I think I say carbon neutrality is something, a reality that we must face. And we really definitely need to drive ourselves and strive to meet this eventual target of carbon neutrality. Support our government, our country to achieve that. Okay, that's all I want to say.
Thank you. Encik Syarul, any last message from you?
Okay, a message to the companies and public here. We like it or not, we need to equip ourselves to be ESG ready. At the same time, MIDA has an enhanced focus on attracting and facilitating sustainable investment project into Malaysia to ensure inclusive and sustained impact to the country. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Because for us, companies and the government need to work closely in developing in terms of, okay, mentioned by Dato' Lim, our policy. Yeah, we know that we are currently working hand in hand and do cooperate when formulating a policy. That's it.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Ivan, any last words from you?
Yeah, I find that it is imperative, to achieve the right balance between the three pillars of sustainability, which is people, planet, and the bottom line, right? And that is important as well. You need to be sustainable in your bottom line as well, right? So all I can say is that it all starts with a journey. I would urge everyone to at least take the first step, and the bank is definitely here to assist and here to encourage you.
Thank you. And Yin Xiaolong, any messages, last wording words from you?
Thanks, Joeita. I would urge people to understand that the policy environment is fluid. You can be proactive about it. You don't have to be passive. But the next 2 years will be quite crucial as we lead up to 2024. The country, as well as regulators in the country, will be making higher commitments in that time. So be prepared to argue your case. Secondly, also recognize that we are all in our own individual ways, as well as companies and as a country, we're also climate vulnerable. And managing climate vulnerability is also part of fulfilling your obligations, regulatory obligations, to manage your climate risk. So don't just focus on emissions. See emissions together with vulnerability management. It's not either or, but you have to look at them together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen of the panels, and then also ladies and gentlemen from the audience through Slido. This has been a very enlightening session. We hope that we can continue this chat in the next few months or so to come. But with that, meantime, have a great Friday and have a great weekend ahead. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.